That was the most dysfunctional meeting I've
So
ever
I was
been to
told
in my life.
Barry wanted to go to the club on Tuesday and fucking.
Hey,
I was gonna go.
careful.
Oh, sorry.
What, is it, we up?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
I heard it was the TV meeting. And I note
So, welcome everybody, welcome back. It's Thursday again, episode number 10, right? Where'd we leave off after we did the prayer in the chapter 5, and we read next. We launched out on a course of vigorous action, right? Isn't that where we left off at? All right, so we're on page 63, and just you can see the board behind me. So we're gonna spend a good deal of the evening probably dissecting and looking at the fourth step inventory. So we'll get started. So I'm starting at the bottom of page 63. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. So what do you think that crucial step that it says, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, what is that decision? What do you think that was? Third step. Okay, so just turning my will and my life over to God's care, and I always envision this. I envision God like this, a set of keys. God cares for my will and my life. I didn't give up my will and my life. Some people would have you believe that. I don't think that was the intent. I don't think there was ever an intention for me to give up my will and my life. I asked God to care for my will and my life, okay? So that decision by itself, in and of itself, what this is saying is probably not nearly enough. It says, unless at once, and it doesn't say, well, when you get around to it, if you get time, you might want to, that's not how it approaches us. It says at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so the excessive use and abuse of alcohol, and for me drugs too, simply made my disease diagnosable. It wasn't necessarily the problem. It was a symptom of a deeper underlying illness, right? Okay? Our liquor was but a symptom. So we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding, fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. So what are your values? What are values? Name some values. What's a value of yours? Anybody?
Being courteous to the elderly.
Okay, being courteous to the elderly. Okay, what's another value? Respect of others. Self-respect. That's a value. What else could be a value? Do unto others as you would. That's the same, kind of the same thing. What about honesty? Is that a value?
Yeah.
Okay. What about love? Is that a value? Yeah, I think so. So, says if the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. So we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First we searched out. So this isn't an effort to find out how bad we are. It's an effort to honestly understand what's been blocking us from succeeding in life, right? That the only way that I was able to get through the day previously was drinking and getting high, right? So I needed to find why I was having such a difficult time of working with others, being a part of society, taking care of myself, of being responsible for myself, right? Because there are a lot of ideas, attitudes that were keeping me stuck and keeping me sick, okay? So first we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways, which was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From its stem all forms of spiritual dis-ease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So it's not the other way around. Isn't that interesting? Because I always thought, well, I get sobered up and I get my belly fixed up a little bit. I get to where I'm eating solid food and keeping solid food down, and and then as I don't drink for a little bit, my mind will clear up, and I'll work on that spiritual stuff a little later, right? Yeah, I'll get to it. But that's not what this says. This says that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And not only physically in the sense of our physical bodies, but my experience has been is that the whole physical reality of what I attract to me has changed. I don't attract the same people, the same circumstances, the same relationships, the same financial relationships. I don't attract the same things anymore, right? That's changed. But that changed when the spiritual change occurred. That was one of the results of that spiritual change, right? Okay. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So that's the first place that it talks about writing things down, okay? In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, we found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which had been interfered with? We were usually as definite as this example. And you're following in your book, obviously, you know the columns that the book establishes. That the first one is the person, principle, or institution, and I've kind of taken an outline up here of different columns as we go through the fourth step that I was taught to create. And so the first one is the name of the person, principle, or institution which we're angry at, burned up at, want to get even with, okay, sore about. So he starts out with his example of Mr. Brown, so the name would be Mr. Brown. And his cause says his attention to my wife. He told my wife of my mistress. Brown may get get my job at the office. So this guy's got a lot of influence over him, right? A lot of power over him, right? Holding him back on his heels. So the cause, I'm burned up, so that's the cause of why I'm angry. And then the effects. Well, of course, it affects his sex relations because, when his wife finds out the truth about his mistress, things are gonna go south there, right? It affects his self-esteem. How do you think this affects his self-esteem?
I think it'll affect his self-esteem.
Speak up.
If it's, in the, just the whole ordeal would affect his self-esteem.
So let's look at what is self-esteem.
I think you'd start to feel shame,
Yeah.
guilt.
Yeah, about the mistress.
So what I'm pulling from is there's a little printable inventory, fourth step inventory that is everything straight out of the book. It's just got some other pieces that kind of help. It's like a prompt sheet for fears and a prompt sheet for the inventory, and kind of a little detailed instruction. But on the fourth page of it, it's got the 7 parts of self defined. And so when we're looking at where had I been what was affected affects these are the parts of self that were affected. So under self-esteem is simply how I think of myself, right? How I feel about me, right? That's self-esteem. So when this guy threatens to take his job from the boss, that threatens how I feel about me, right? In a way. It can also threaten how I feel about me related to my wife if I'm being dishonest with her and I know that she sees me for what I truly am, which is a liar, a cheat, and a thief, right? Okay? So that affects my self-esteem as well. So self-esteem is how I think of myself. Pride is how I think others see me, right? Pride is I'm worried about and concerned about what you think of me. And you hear people say it all the time in alcoholics. I don't give a damn what anybody thinks about me. I don't know that I believe that at all. I care about other people and how they feel about me. I want to be esteemed by my fellows, right? I want people to look at me in a favorable way. That is important to me. Would I sacrifice my value of honesty or integrity in order to get you to do that? Not today, but at one time I did. And so in my inventory, I discovered some things like this, that I did often compromise my values of honesty, integrity, and truthfulness so that you would like me or feel good about me, right? Okay. So pocketbook is basic desire for money, property, and possession. So it can be anything material, right? Pocketbook, related to money or any of our belongings. Personal relations are our relations with other people. Ambitions are our goals, our plans, our designs for the future, where I want to go in life, how I feel about life in general, looking forward. Emotional security, general sense of personal well-being. Okay, that's emotional security, is a general sense of emotional well-being. That I feel comfortable in my own skin, that I feel secure in the world, that I believe that I have a place here, right? And sex relations, obviously, the basic drive for sex and sexual intimacy. So that gives you a little description of the seven parts of self. So he says that his sex relations, self-esteem, and it says fear is bracketed beside that. We'll come back to that. Sex relations, self-esteem, security, and self-esteem, all of these things are affected by his resentment towards Mr. Brown. In the second one, it's Mrs. Jones. She's a nut job. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. So obviously personal relationships were affected by that, right? His friend got committed. Self-esteem, and there's some fear in there too. We'll go back to that again. My employer, he's unreasonable, he's unjust, overbearing. He threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. Self-esteem and security, I would venture to say that personal relationships are probably affected by that as well, and probably pride too. My wife, she misunderstands and nags me. She likes Mr. Brown. She wants the house put in her name. So my pride definitely is hurt. How I feel, how you see me is hurt or threatened, right? My personal and sex relations, both with my wife, and my security. So it says we went back to our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So I'll say that again. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So I was taught to go all the way back, as far back as I could remember. From I think my first resentment was probably at maybe 6 years of age or something like that, as far back as I could remember. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that the world and its people were often quite wrong. And this is true, you know, the reality of it is that people are often quite wrong. People do bad things, people harm us. Sometimes people harm us without provocation, but it's going to later make a statement about that as well. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. So remorse is a resentment at yourself. Got it? But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. It's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours it might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of drink returns, and we drink again. So it's telling you that this is a prescription for the insanity to return if you harbor resentments, right? It doesn't say that if you get angry, you're going to get drunk. That's not what this says. It says, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. What do you think they meant by the grouch and the brainstorm?
Overthinking stuff to the point where it pisses you off.
Okay, so the brainstorm would be taking if I just look at it long enough and examine it well enough, I'll figure it out and then it'll be okay. Is that?
Or like you say, get a bigger hammer.
Or get a bigger hammer. So it's that kind of rolling around again and again, staying up here in my head, right? The brainstorm, is that kind of how you might understand it? So what's the grouch mean?
Oh,
Being bitter.
shutting down, not being social, involved with others.
Okay, so kind of being pissed off at the world and blocking everybody out.
Yeah, isolated.
Okay, isolating. Okay, so the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us.
I get like for me the grouch just
Speak up.
for the grouch I just think it comes to me like someone that's very close minded.
Somebody that's very closed-minded. Okay, grouchy old man,
Or grouchy young man.
grouchy young man. Okay, all right, all right. So we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. That's an important statement. The list that you've just written of resentments holds the key to the future. How? It says we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. That's how. When we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us, in that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done." So it's giving you the prescription for how to move forward in relationships in your life. See that? This isn't even about understanding anything current. This is about when somebody offends us from this day forward, this is our prescription of how to deal with it. Understand? We avoid retaliation or argument. How many of us are able to do that? Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not as good at it. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? And there's very, very few things that I don't like in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I hate the word blame. I loathe the word blame. I like the word responsible. Where am I responsible? See, that changes things for me. Not where was I to blame, where am I responsible? That's different. That doesn't engender guilt, shame, and remorse. It engenders responsibility, which takes away the shame, guilt, and remorse. When you get responsible for your behavior, guilt and shame go away. See? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. So here it is, again, talking about writing this down, right? We listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. My first sponsor called it a good old number 2 self-delusion fighter and a white piece of paper. He said, that's what's going to save your life. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. So I'm gonna go through one all the way to person harmed. And I had a boss that I worked for when I was a young man, probably a teenager out of high school, and we installed a cable TV system for the government up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And one day we were working burying cable, and we had a cable locator, which was an electronic locating device, and we were using it that day. I had got it out of the truck, and when we were done using it, I didn't put it away. I put it back in its case, and I set it on the side of the street, not in the street, but next to the curb. And lo and behold, here comes this dump truck driver, and guess what happens? Well, no more cable locator, right? So my boss calls me into the office that later that day, and he said, so what are we going to do about this this cable locator that got broke today? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I didn't run over it. And he said, well, who got it out of the truck? I said, well, He said, well, he said, what you're gonna have to do, he says, I'm gonna take $10 a pay out of your check until you're paid in full. And I was livid. I was like, I didn't run over that thing. I shouldn't have to pay for it. That truck driver should have to pay for it, right? Got me another drink, right? Drank some more, and lo and behold, he took $10 a week out of my check till I think it was a $200 item, right? 35 years ago, that was a big deal. So, opportunity came, and I needed something that my boss had in inventory. Namely, it was a TV antenna for my house. And so I helped myself to that TV antenna because, he owed me, right? He owed me, right? So in taking this through this process of the inventory, my boss, Ken, I was burned up at, wanted to get even with. In fact, I think I did kind of get even with him, and sore at. And what was affected was my security in a way, but security could be tied to pocketbook, but security in the fact that if I fought him too hard, he'd probably fire me. So my self-esteem, how I felt about myself, because I felt like I had let him down, right? My pocketbook, obviously. My ambitions towards that job, because I was like, man, if he's going to treat me like this, I don't know if I want to go on with this company, right? Ambitions. So personal relations with Ken for sure, sex relations none, and pride certainly about what you think of me, right? So all of the parts of self were affected in this, almost all. Where had I been selfish? Well, I never thought about the fact that, Ken bought that piece of equipment and all the other pieces of equipment that we used, and it was in my custody and care, right? It was in my custody and care. Nobody, it wasn't going to pick itself up off the ground and go put itself in the truck. It was my responsibility, and that's what I failed to see. Selfish, certainly. Dishonest, I don't know that I was dishonest except in that, later I hurt him. I stole from him because I thought he owed me. Self-seeking, I guess, maybe. Frightened, yeah, I was afraid that I wouldn't have enough. He takes $10 out of my check a week. Hell, I'm making probably $120 a week, so, $10 is $10. So, frightened, inconsiderate, absolutely. I was absolutely inconsiderate. So, my inventory, where am I responsible? Well, like I said, it was in my custody and care. I was responsible for it. I should pay for it. I should make amends for what I did. Person harmed, Ken. Ken was harmed. Why was Ken harmed? Because I stole from him. I stole from him not only the money and the material that I stole from him, I stole time from him because of that. My attitude was poor. I stole from him emotionally that way. I stole from him in a lot of ways. Fears. So my fear was simply that there wasn't enough, that I wouldn't have enough. So that's just one resentment all the way through the columns to fears. Okay? So it says, notice the word fear that's bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Miss Jones, and the employer and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. So it says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. So it's treating this as its own column. You understand? This isn't something that's just in relationship to resentments. It is, and we can look back at our resentments and look at the fears that were associated with each particular resentment, whatever it was. But fears is a whole category in and of and by itself. So what are my fears? My fears were that the law was going to catch up with me, that I was going to go to the penitentiary, that I could never really stay sober, that I would never have a relationship with my daughter, that that I was just one of those constitutionally incapable people, you know, that the book talked about, that I would never really enjoy an ongoing, uninterrupted sobriety and recovery. I was afraid of that God was done with me. I was afraid that people were done with me and would never trust me again. I was afraid that I could never have a good income in a business like I had had previously. I was afraid that I would never be financially secure. I was afraid that I couldn't pay the debt that I had. I mean, these are all fears of mine in the very beginning, okay? So, on top of the fears that we list related to people, principles, and institutions on this first column that appear, what, over here, where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, right? No, it's in the affects my column, parts of self. On top of those fears, we examine all of our other fears as well. I had fears that I would never have a healthy, quality relationship with a woman that I loved and loved me. There were so many fears, you know. So it says, we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, here again, even though we had no resentment in connection with them, understand? We ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance had failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there's a better way. We think so. For we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. And so, my example with my boss in that situation doesn't really lend itself well to seeing how fears play out in relationship to our resentments. But the examples that they give here in the book set pretty definite, connected scenarios where you could really see how fears perpetuate and enhance resentments, right? All right. So now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible about this question. It's easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes. Absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think that we do not have enough of it, or that it's not the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? So, I subjected each one of my relationships that were romantic relationships to this test. So each one that I could think of, I went back as far as I could, all the way back to the first girl that I ever held hands with and skated around the roller rink with, right? And I subjected them to this test. It says, was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our, I'm sorry, I went too far forward, didn't I? Okay, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? I like the idea of saying what could we have done instead, but the book does use the word should. We got this all down on paper and looked at it. So again, we write it out, okay? In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound idea of our future sex life, okay? Pay attention to that statement because that's important. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We ask ourselves to mold our ideas and to help us live up to them. We remembered that always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our idea turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. So, I mean, that's what an idea. Have you ever thought about bringing God into making decisions about your sex life? That was such a foreign concept to me. I just, because I just thought that, I had this really weird, strange idea about sex that somehow God wasn't interested in it, or that I couldn't include God in that, or, does that, anybody else have that challenge? Yeah. So the book says that we go to God in meditation and we ask for the right answer, the right thing to do. You say, go ahead.
Yeah. Where it says we subjected each relationship to this test, was it selfish or not? I mean, but couldn't it be argued that any relationship or sexual encounter is selfish to some extent?
I think that's true. Yeah, I do, and that's a really hard. That's a really hard thing to weigh out. Is it selfish or not? I had a roommate years ago in the program, and he said he was all about what Bob Seger said. Bob Seger said, she used me, I used her, and neither one cared. So is that okay? So I think that you have to decide what's okay for you and what your value is. So we subject each one to the test. Did we arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What could we have done instead? Okay? And what are my values related to sex? Write them out. What is important to me? Is it important to me that I be married? Is sex outside the institution of marriage, is that prohibitive for me? For me, it's not. It never has been. I've never felt that way. Some people do. Their religious values dictate that, and that's what they believe. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's your value. but it's not my value. So it's not something I have to live up to or even try to live up to. So it says, pray to God to help us grow toward that idea. Okay? Whatever it turns out to be. That's what the book says. The book doesn't say this is what it needs to be. It says whatever that idea turns out to be. It says, we treat sex as in meditation we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. And that can be, I think when it says that, it can be about making amends, and it can be about future relationships, right? The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with others is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Suppose we fall short of the chosen idea and stumble. Does that mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done, and we have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are the facts of our experience. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right idea, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge, when to yield would mean heartache. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We have listed people and we have hurt by our conduct, and we are willing to straighten out the past if we can. So it's telling you, it's giving you a clue right there that a big number of your eighth step list, comes from your resentment sheet. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning. So check it out. Until you are through the fourth step of Alcoholics Anonymous, it suggests that you've only made a beginning, right? That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Questions? Comments? Time you got?
6:42.
So,
Yeah, I'll say something actually.
go ahead.
Here in the beginning, when it's talking about the inventory and how a business usually takes inventory, when I was reading through this with my sponsor, that was a profound thing for me, just because I have experience with doing inventories in other fashions. And I don't feel like that I got the effect from them like I did doing an inventory like this, more concise, business-like, straight and to the point. I don't know, just the way I've done them before, I was allowed to digress way too much and get away from what I was really trying to look at. So I don't know, it was just it was two pretty profound paragraphs for me when I was originally going through this with my sponsor and just taking a look at the inventory that way. was very helpful for me. Like it's a business inventory of myself.
Yes, absolutely. Cool. Anybody else? Is everybody pretty much followed this example or whatever in your inventory? So I found a lot of things for myself in doing my inventory. One in particular was that most of the things that I resented about other people I became. Like my mom, when I was a little boy, she got drunk, passed out, put some food on the stove, it burnt the food up. She woke up, she blamed me for doing it, right? So it was one of my resentments was towards her for that, for blaming me for things that I didn't do. And so, what was a big theme in my life was blaming others for things that they didn't do that I did, right? Yeah, for not taking responsibility. So I saw themes like that begin to appear in my inventory. One thing that I found in my sex inventory was that I often trusted before trust was earned in relationships, because I wanted the relationship to grow from friendship to a sexual relationship, and I wanted that to go real fast, right? And so I trusted before trust was established or earned, and often I got hurt by women that I chose that weren't trustworthy, okay? But it was my responsibility, because of the value, I sacrificed that value of letting someone earn my trust first and prove that they're trustworthy, right? So there were a lot of things that I learned about myself in my inventory, most of which I think fear, and I spent probably the least amount of time with it, but that fear ran everything for me in my life. I was afraid, I was scared to death of everything. I was scared to live, Financial insecurity was probably one of the biggest fears that I had. It's one of the ones that I continued to struggle with for many years in recovery. I don't struggle with it today, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't occur again or could not become significant again in my life. It's just not today. I've had a lot of years in recovery where finances were horrible, where I really struggled for a lot of years. I got sober, I did well for a number of years, and then the economy turned, and I struggled terribly for a lot of years. But you know what it did was it drove me to rely upon God and trust God and really get seated in that knowledge that God's going to take care of me, So. Well, I think we'll stop there. The next chapter into action deals with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think. Yeah, up to 9, 10, 11. So we're going to go through the next few steps quickly. I've given the most time and consideration to the beginning steps here because the book does that, and I think that they deserve that as well. The others are a little easier and a little less, there's just a little less to do with them. So we'll start back with Into Action next week, and thank you again.